Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Just Steve here. Just the me today. Just wanting to do something a little bit different to what I would normally do for a Grand Slam. So obviously, it's going to be a pretty busy 2.5 weeks ahead. And normally, most of the information I provide is after the draw ceremony, whereas I wanted to try and turn things around a little bit this time and try something a little bit different. So I've just kind of gone through and analyzed the seeding situation for both the men's and the women's, and looked at some potential scenarios and things, I guess, to look out for, particularly when the draw comes out in about 30 hours time. So I think you'll notice this time more than probably any other recent Grand Slam draw that you'll be seeing some pretty significant shifts in odds depending on how players end up drawing. We might as well just get straight into it. So what I'll do is I'll just bring up onto the screen here just a couple of slides I've been able to put together. And I just wanted to break it down into sections of what we will see in each of these draws. So we'll start off with the men. So obviously the big news, I guess, of recent times is the fact that we've got Alexander Zverev now popping into that 4 seed. So Nadal was ranked 4th in the world up until a couple of days ago. So even had Nadal been playing, Zverev still would have been able to take this 4 spot here. But here we have the top 4 seeds. So they'll obviously be split into a quarter each. And just looking at these 4 players and looking at, I guess, where their strengths lie comparatively and in terms of what quarters to maybe look for some potential value. I guess we've obviously got Novak Djokovic at the top, followed by Daylight, which I think is pretty clear for everyone to see over the course of the last couple of years. I then have Medvedev and Zverev basically on an even keel in terms of, obviously, Zverev's been able to build a lot of confidence over the last month or so through Tokyo and also through Cincinnati. And I have both of them ahead of Stefanos Tsitsipas. So for me, in terms of what I'll be looking for in an ideal world, and what some scenarios are, I guess, for particular backers of particular players, is we've got the best scenario, in my opinion, for Novak Djokovic backers is for Tsitsipas to be in the same half. So Medvedev and Zverev will end up in the other half. If you're after Medvedev or you're backing Medvedev, you obviously, I think, want the same situation there. I think Zverev being your half is going to be the harder draw. What's going to be difficult for Zverev regardless, and why he's a little bit longer in the odds than Medvedev at the moment, is the fact that as the 4 seed, he'll need to go through, one of Medvedev or Djokovic in the semi-final to potentially play the other in the final. So that's where things get a little bit more difficult for him. That's guaranteed. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this particular part of the draw. And I think where this probably gets a little bit more interesting as we look to the 5 to 8 seeds is we've got a very different look here in terms of the players in 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we have Rublev, Berrettini, Shapovalov, and Casper Ruud pops in at the 8 seed. So when we look at the strength rating, I guess, of these 4 players, I'd have Andre Rublev and Matteo Berrettini pretty even. I think Rublev's shown a little bit more on the hard court, but Berrettini's shown a little bit more at Grand Slam level. So it is a little bit harder to split those two, I think. Then there's a little bit of daylight, I think, to Shapovalov, who has shown, he showed at Wimbledon he can make a deep run. He's made a solid run here last year at the US Open. When he puts it all together, he is obviously very, very tough to beat, but his consistency at the moment is all over the place, and that does make it a little bit tricky, I guess, to support him thinking to outright positions. But Casper Ruud is the one that I want to talk about, because in the past, we've kind of been sitting in these spots where Matteo Berrettini's been sitting around that 8 seed, and there hasn't really been a noticeable weak 8th of the draw. Whereas I think Casper Ruud here kind of pops up as, although Shapovalov can be inconsistent, I think there are a number of players, ranked 9 through 32 who are capable of knocking off Casper Ruud. So that is the spot I think I would be keeping an eye on, particularly as the draw comes out in just over a day's time. So for mine, what I'd be looking at in terms of strongest quarter scenarios, so you're going to get one of those 1 to 4 and one of those 5 to 8, you're probably looking at Djokovic and Rublev, or Djokovic and Berrettini as probably the stronger scenarios. Looking to the weaker scenarios, I think it's a really attackable quarter if you can get Tsitsipas and Ruud together, followed by basically any other quarter with Ruud. followed by Tsitsipas and Shapovalov. I think they're the scenarios where if you do get those particular positions to be able to make, I guess, a little bit of a play, I think that's going to be attackable from a quarter standpoint. But within that, I think there's really attackable eighths. There's a really attackable eighth of the draw, and that's going to be basically wherever Casper Ruud lands. It's going to be even more attackable if he's as far away from Novak Djokovic in the draw as possible. And I think if you do see him in the other half, if you think about it and you look at some of the players that, we're getting through these other seeds here, there's a number of players here I think you could look at through here and the next batch of seeds that would be able to take Casper Ruud, I think, in the conditions, particularly over best of 5 on hard court. Looking here to these players here, 9 through 16, so they'll be split up, obviously, evenly across the draw as well. You've got Carreño Busta, Hurkacz, and Schwartzman all have recent Grand Slam semi-final experience, so they have been able to make that deep run. Carreño Busta has been consistent, although his ceiling probably isn't as high as a number of the other players through this 1 to 16 range. Hurkacz has shown that he can play really well in North America across the course of 2021. He's won a couple of tournaments, but I do worry a little bit about him if he is playing in the heat of the day. So I think that's a tricky one to kind of keep an eye on. Schwartzman, and I've mentioned him here, I think, and I popped him down the bottom, and I should mention down the bottom there that Felix should probably be down there as well, that I think he's a little bit vulnerable here. He hasn't shown enough form and consistency for me to really be strongly jumping in. Jannik Sinner is the intriguing one, I think, out of this group of 8. His best is winning tournaments. He is struggling against the likes of, John Isner the other week. I'll forgive his loss coming off his title a couple of weeks ago. So he's a little bit up and down, but again, another who has shown to be a little bit vulnerable at times in the heat. De Minaur and Dimitrov are both out of form. So if you do find, a player like a Sinner, for example, if you can end up with, that section or that 8th of the draw with Casper Ruud, I think there's a really good potential there to maybe make a play for him to make a deeper run here. And as I said, Diego Schwartzman, and I should mention down there, I think Felix is probably still a little bit vulnerable across the best of 5. He played some brilliant tennis in Melbourne at the Australian Open and still found himself unable to really finish off against Karatsev, and the same against Berrettini and Wimbledon. I think he's starting to piece it together. And if he got a fantastic draw, then look, I'd probably look to maybe consider him in some sort of capacity, but it would need to be kind of all the stars aligning. I think for him, he'd need to be away from Novak, probably in maybe that Tsitsipas section, but probably closer to a Casper Ruud for me to really be intrigued by taking him in the outrights. And I'd probably be looking to more so to a quarter winner section than an outright win overall. We then move on to 17 through 32. So obviously these players will all be split up, into each quarter as well. So just a couple of notes through these 16 players. So there's injury and fitness doubts over Goffin, Raonic, and Monfils, in my opinion. More so the injury to Goffin and Raonic, and Monfils, I'm just questioning whether he can play best of 5 sets 7 times in a row across a fortnight. I mean, it may be even twice or 3 times. Might be a stretch at the moment. Form doubts: Karatsev, Humbert, Evans, Fognini, Fokina, Cilic, and Bautista Agut, for one reason or another, they either haven't got that high ceiling that you probably need to get through best of 5 in these conditions in particular, or they just haven't had the consistency, I guess, in their game. So Karatsev hasn't shown enough for me, I think, really since the Belgrade clay tournament. He's been a little bit up and down. Humbert has been a hit and miss, particularly more so in Grand Slams. The same with Evans, has been a little bit patchy of late. Fognini is Fognini. Fokina, had a good run here at the US Open last year, but again, his second serve can go missing at times, and he does find himself a little bit vulnerable, within matches that he should be winning comfortably. Cilic is not the Cilic of years ago when he was able to win this tournament, and Bautista Agut has probably been one of the more disappointing aspects of 2021 for me in terms of the ATP. Consistency doubts, well, you can put Bublik there. Again, if he would need a dream position for me to consider him for quarters or outrights, just because I don't know if he can maintain that level. consistently for enough matches to be in any outright equation. And Sonego as well, I'll put there. I just don't know about his consistency, particularly across the course of a Grand Slam and that top level tournament, best of 5, that I just don't think he has quite got that. So that leaves the players to consider with the right draw. You've got Khachanov, Norrie, Opelka, and Isner. I'm generally not really keen to get involved with Isner. I'd rather him over best of 3 than best of 5, but it's hard to, not take notice of the form he's been able to produce over the last month. Same with Opelka. If I had to pick out of the two, I'd probably go for Isner a little bit over Opelka. Norrie's an intriguing one, and it's probably going to depend a little bit on matchups, but if he gets a really nice run, he has the potential to make a deep push here. And Khachanov, he's starting to round into some sort of form over the last, 4 to 6 weeks, but it is Khachanov at a Grand Slam, and that does bring its own question marks. So they would be the 4 that I'm probably going to be keeping an eye on, when this draw comes out, as to where they can maybe pop up. As I mentioned before, if you can get one of those 4 players at the bottom there, popping up in an 8th with Casper Ruud, I think you're a genuine chance of those players getting through to a quarter final, and more likely to get there than Casper Ruud. From there, there's a couple of unseeded players, I guess, to keep an eye on. Taylor Fritz, Fucsovics, Korda, Struff, Benoit Paire, Lloyd Harris, Tiafoe, Kupfer, Nick Kyrgios, and Nishikori. There's a few others that I could probably rattle off there, but these are the players that you probably put them, if they were able to produce their best level. They can cause a challenge to probably anyone from that 9 to 32 in the seeding, and maybe a couple of the others above on their best day, and Ruud. So we'll say from 8 to 32. I just put some asterisks next to Benoit Paire and Nick Kyrgios, because I'd have them as more of a concern if they were going to be the opponent in round 1 or round 2. I'm not as worried about, as I said, if you've got a really nice scenario with, say, Yannick Sinner in a good spot of the draw, maybe in Casper Ruud section, I wouldn't be as worried about Nick Kyrgios if it was a potential 3rd or 4th round match. It's more kind of early days when they're probably still going to be in the tournament and have that ability to cause an upset. So that's, I guess, my look at the men's side of things. If we just switch over to the women's, this is where things got a little bit interesting in the last week or so. So there is the potential, looking at these seeds here with Barty, Sabalenka, Osaka, and Pliskova, there's potential for Ash Barty and Naomi Osaka to end up on the same half of the draw. So Sabalenka's popped up to number 2 in the world, and that's where things can get a little bit tricky. So if we have a look at the strength rating, I've got Barty and Osaka level. I should probably have Barty a little bit ahead, and I probably would if it were any other tournament except the US Open. I think Osaka has shown, obviously, it's her arguably her strongest tournament, maybe followed by the Australian Open, but I'm just a little bit wary with her at the moment. She hasn't played a lot of tennis, and I'm finding it a little bit tricky to place her. Then we have a little bit of daylight. Then we have Sabalenka. Then we have Pliskova. The ideal scenario, if you're looking to back Barty, have a look at the draw. If you get Pliskova in the same half, I think that's the great position here. And the ideal scenario for Osaka backers is probably to get Sabalenka in the same half, just by how the draw dynamics and how things work out with those seeds 1 through 4. So what I'm wanting to kind of point out here is, if the 2 favorites for the tournament in Barty and Osaka find themselves in the same half, the other half is going to be really quite open to attack in some capacity. Who you attack with? Fantastic question. And there's quite a long list that you can work with. But if we just work through seeds 5 through 8, this is where things again can get a little bit interesting. So I would probably put Swiatek, Svitolina, and Andreescu on pretty similar playing fields when you consider form, fitness, Grand Slam experience. So they've all kind of got, Swiatek and Andreescu have obviously won slams. Svitolina's probably looked a little bit more consistent of late on the hard court, but gets a little bit vulnerable late in Grand Slams. Andreescu has the highest ceiling of these players, but has been injury plagued and doesn't quite have that consistency that you're looking for. Then there's daylight. Then there's Sofia Kenin. And I won't spend too much time talking about Kenin, I think, today. I'll wait for that to talk more about that through the outright previews when they come out. But I think when you look at these 8 players, The strongest quarter scenarios are probably a Barty or an Osaka paired with a Swiatek or an Andreescu. The weaker scenario is if you get a quarter with Pliskova and Kenin. I think that's going to be really attackable, or Pliskova with Svitolina. And in that particular matchup, it's probably something I'd almost consider some sort of outright trade on Svitolina, depending on who the other unseeded and lower seeded players are that pop up in her section of the draw. So what to look for here. The other half, is it's attackable if Barty and Osaka end up in the same half. So look to the other side. And as I said there, I'd consider Svitolina outrights if she were to be in the same quarter as Pliskova, which is something I don't say all that often. If we have a look now at the seeds 9 through 16, obviously the big name at the top there is Krejcikova, who is probably got the best body of form across 2021 of these 8 players. I think if we look through, and there's a couple of notes here, so she's the most consistent performer. The recent form of Bencic is probably the best across that smaller sample size, if that's what you want to work with. The consistency concerns I have around Muguruza and Kvitova, and I'd also argue with Kvitova, there's some issues probably around the humidity and heat that do come with Flushing Meadows as well. I don't think she's playing well enough to kind of jump into her before you know what the draw is. I think a tough match for her in the first week is going to cause a little bit of trouble for her. I have overall form concerns around Elise Mertens. So it would take a really good draw to, I guess, be interested in taking her. There's fitness concerns around Halep and Brady, and Pavlyuchenkova I'm finding a little bit tricky to place on hard court at the moment. I'm neither in her favor or against her at the moment. So I'm happy to kind of leave her as someone I'm wary of, but I don't think it's going to be a genuine threat for a couple of players through these portions of the draw. Then we have I've got ATP there. It's the WTA seed 17 through 32. Kerber, Zachary, Azarenka, Rybakina, Jabeur, Williams, Goff, Mahova, Pegula, Badosa, Kasatkina, Collins, Ostapenko, Kontaveit, Kudermetova, and Martic. So we can break it down into a couple of categories. Injury, fitness, doubts. I know Azarenka got through some tennis last week. She just hasn't played enough, I think, for me to really confidently jump into the prices that she's listed. You can say the same about Serena Williams. She just hasn't played enough for me, I think, to think about not only how she goes across the course of a fortnight of tennis, but then knowing that the nerves are going to build as you get to the pointy end. So I'm not as keen to, I guess, jump into them. I have form doubts around Mahova, Kudermetova, and Martic from a win a Grand Slam perspective. There's consistency doubts around Jabeur. She's finding herself losing matches that she really shouldn't lose and sets she probably shouldn't lose. Kontaveit's too up and down for my liking, I think, to look into these outrights here. Ostapenko, again, too up and down. And Kasatkina, whilst there are some obviously positives around backing Kasatkina, for me personally, I think I've come to the point, and anyone who's followed me for a while has probably noticed I'm not getting as involved in Kasatkina matches. I just don't have a desire to get involved in 3-set matches that involve Kasatkina at love 30 and 15-30 multiple times and wondering, will she dig out of the hole or not? If she gets a great draw, then I'll consider her, but I'm not really jumping up and down at that opportunity at the moment, looking at the outright prices that are available. And this is where things get a little bit trickier. So that leaves a lot more a number of players to consider, including Kerber, Zachary, Rybakina, Goff, Pegula, Danielle Collins, and Badosa. So there's some interesting names, and they're the players that I'm going to be looking for if we look back to the previous slide around a couple of those weaker potential quarters. They're going to be the players that I'm actually going to end up targeting in some capacity there. So I think that's a nice list, I think, as a starting point. If you can work quickly, I think things are really going to move across both the men's and the women's draws, depending on, one, the makeup of where Zverev falls as to which half, where Casper Ruud falls as to which quarter, and then coming to this side, I think where you end up having which eighth has Sophia Kenin, because I think she is a little bit vulnerable still, just off not a lot of tennis. And the potential there for, if you look at these players to consider here with the right draw down the bottom, if you're seeing these players in the opposite half to a Barty and an Osaka, then I'd probably start to look to get involved. Obviously, there's a lot that needs to go into a draw, and there's a lot of players here to kind of talk about. Of the unseeded players to kind of consider, we've got Alexandrova, Georgie, Vondrasova, Madison Keys, Sorribes, Tormo, Teichmann, Kostyuk, Putintseva, and Castella. Again, Alexandrova just hasn't been able to put together a whole body of work across weeks or, across a full week recently. So I'd be more worried if she were to be a potential first or second round opponent. Madison Keys is probably the same. Her best tennis can beat most on tour, but it's just about that consistency. So I'd be more worried if she was a projected second round match than a fourth round match, for example. But there's a couple of names to keep an eye on as well. So just going through that, obviously there's a bit to play out. I just wanted to kind of touch on both of these draws before, we have the draw ceremony and everyone's split up, because it will be in the middle of the night for me. And my content probably doesn't come out until a day or two afterwards. So if you can find some nice spots and find some nice prices, and you might be able to come up with a really good position, I think, as a starting point. But just be aware that I think these draws are probably going to have the most changes pre-draw to post-draw that we've seen in recent times at a Grand Slam level. And that's because of the weaknesses at the bottom part of the top 8 compared to what we've normally seen, particularly on the men's side. You take Federer out, you take Nadal out, you take Thiem out, and everyone else moves up a little bit, and things can get a little bit funny there through that 7, 8, 9 spot. And in this instance, it's Casper Ruud as a predominantly clay court player who can play some, solid tennis on hard court. He is probably the most vulnerable there, looking at the potential, seedings through 1 through 8. So just to give a little bit of a summary, there's going to be a lot of content over the next 2.5 weeks. So my outright previews will be up on the Betfair Hub. We'll have daily match previews on the Betfair Hub and also on acetennispreviews.com. I'll be doing DraftKings previews, should win lists, previews for the other tournaments that are running through the second week. I think Sean and Vinny and Alex will have content up on Ace Tennis previews as well. So I guess the best way you can support, and the main thing I guess to highlight with all of this, is all the content's freely accessible, thanks to Betfair, thanks to Public. So if you do, view any of the content on acetennispreviews.com, if you could sign up to Public and create an account there and click through, it just gives a little, I guess, token of support to the website and continues to allow the website to be able to attract and get Alex and Sean and Vinny writing some more previews. The other thing is, just to view and like and share and subscribe and retweet, or even pressing through to I've set up a page on Buy Me a Coffee just to, if anyone wants to show support. I'm not a big person of kind of, I don't highlight the big wins, but I just want to try and find, I guess, a little bit of a level of consistency. I don't, ask for anything when winning, and I also don't give you money when I'm losing. So I guess it's one of those things. That's one of the traps, I guess, of being free, is that you kind of open up to a little bit more. But hopefully within all of this content, there's a little bit of valuable stuff to follow along with over the next couple of weeks. The last 3 Grand Slams have all been quite nice, so hopefully it can continue, but nothing is guaranteed. If you do have any questions, by all means, feel free to either email me at ace@acetennispreviews.com or get in touch with me on Twitter at ace_previews. Good luck for the next couple of weeks. Hopefully the draw is friendly and we can find a little bit of value. And my outright previews will be up on the Betfair Hub over the weekend. So I will talk to you a little bit more, and we'll have Eat Sleep Tennis as well in the probably 24 to 36 hours before round 1 kicks off. So I will